The rejection email arrived at 9:02 a.m., short and polite, the kind that pretends it wasn't personal even when it clearly was. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee still untouched, when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. I wish I had. Thank you for your interest. After careful consideration, we've decided not to move forward. That was it. No feedback, no call, no conversation, just a closed door. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then scrolled down to see the signature. My uncle's name sat there neatly, exactly as I expected. He hadn't even delegated the rejection. He wanted it to come from him. Family or not, I exhaled slowly and leaned against the counter. This wasn't some random company. This was his firm, the one he'd built his entire identity around. The one he bragged about at every family gathering. The one where he'd said, countless times, if you ever want to work here, you just have to ask. So I had, and this was his answer. What made it worse wasn't the rejection itself. It was the reason he'd given me 2 days earlier, during our brief, uncomfortable phone call. You're not qualified to work here, he'd said flatly. Family or not. I remembered the pause after he said it, the way he'd waited for me to argue, to plead, to remind him of my experience. I didn't. I simply thanked him for his time and ended the call. He'd mistaken my calm for acceptance. The truth was, I hadn't applied because I needed the job. I'd applied because I wanted to see who he thought I was. Growing up, my uncle had always been the measuring stick. The successful one. The self-made one. At family dinners, his stories took up the most space. His opinions ended conversations. When he spoke, people listened, including my parents, including me. He loved reminding everyone that he didn't hand out favors, that he believed in merit, that no one got special treatment, especially not family. What he didn't know, what he had never bothered to ask, was where I'd been for the last 8 years. What I'd built, who I worked with, or why my name never appeared publicly next to the companies he admired so much. I liked it that way. After reading the email one last time, I locked my phone and sat down at the table. My laptop was already open. A spreadsheet glowed on the screen, filled with numbers most people never saw unless they were at the very top. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, my mind drifted back to the first time I realized how little my uncle thought of me. I was 22, fresh out of school, excited, nervous. At a family barbecue, I'd mentioned a consulting project I was working on. He'd smiled, patted my shoulder, and said, "That's cute. Real business is different." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That was the moment I stopped sharing. From then on, I worked quietly. I partnered carefully. I stayed invisible on purpose. I learned that power doesn't announce itself. It waits. I opened the spreadsheet now. At the top was the name of my holding company. Below it, a list of active contracts. One of them stood out. Large, very large, my uncle's firm. He didn't know that the biggest client his company had signed in the last 2 years wasn't just a logo on a slide deck. It was me, not directly, not obviously, through layers, through legal entities, through structures designed to keep things clean and professional. He'd never questioned it. Why would he? Money had been flowing in on time, every time. The contract was solid. The client was quiet, exactly how I preferred it. I closed the spreadsheet and checked the time. 9:11 a.m. In less than an hour, my uncle would be walking into his office, confident, unaware, believing he'd drawn a clear line between business and family. I smiled faintly. He had, just not the one he thought. Because rejecting my application hadn't disqualified me. It had given me clarity. And by the end of the day, my uncle was going to learn something very uncomfortable. He wasn't the one who decided who was qualified. By the time my uncle arrived at his office, I was already dressed and out the door. I didn't rush. There was no need. The kind of leverage I held didn't expire if you were 5 minutes late. Traffic was light. The city looked ordinary, unaware that a very small decision, an email sent too quickly, a dismissal spoken too casually, was about to unravel something much larger. As I drove, my phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. 10:30 a.m., quarterly client review call. I hadn't scheduled it for today by accident. My uncle loved these calls. He liked being seen as calm, in control, indispensable. He'd once told me that clients respected confidence more than competence. At the time, I'd nodded. Now, I understood the flaw in that belief. When I reached my office, the receptionist greeted me by name and handed me a tablet without asking. Everything was ready. My team already knew today wasn't about numbers. It was about truth. I stepped into the conference room and closed the door. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. On the screen, muted for now, sat the video call interface. My uncle's firm hadn't joined yet. I sat down, folded my hands, and waited. At exactly 10:31, the call connected. There he was, suit pressed, tie perfect, that familiar confident smile on his face. He was flanked by two senior partners, both nodding politely as they recognized the client's logo on the screen. They didn't recognize me, not yet. "Good morning," my uncle said smoothly. "Always a pleasure." I returned the smile. "Good morning." The smile on his face froze. Just slightly. Enough that I noticed. There was a pause. He leaned closer to the screen. "I didn't realize you'd be joining this call." "I usually don't," I said evenly. "But today felt appropriate." One of the partners cleared his throat. "Are you representing?" "I'm representing myself," I replied. "And the parent entity holding this contract." Silence. Not the awkward kind. The dangerous kind. The kind where people suddenly realize they're missing information. My uncle laughed softly. "I think there's been some confusion." "No," I said. "This is clarity." I tapped the tablet once. The screen shared a document. The contract. Highlighted sections appeared: ownership, authority, termination clauses. I watched his eyes move as he read. The confidence drained from his face slowly, like water from a cracked glass. "You're the principal?" he asked. "Yes." "That's not possible," one of the partners said quickly. "We've dealt with a holding structure," I finished for him, "designed to keep relationships professional." My uncle swallowed. Why wasn't I told? I met his gaze directly. "You never asked." The room on his side shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone whispered his name, low and urgent. He tried to recover. "If this is about the application." "It's not," I said. "That was just confirmation." "Confirmation of what?" "That you would never see me as an equal unless you were forced to." Another silence. He looked smaller now, not because of me, but because the story he'd told himself was collapsing. "You said I wasn't qualified," I continued. "Family or not." His mouth opened, then closed. "I agree," I said calmly. "Family shouldn't get special treatment." One of the partners leaned forward. "Are you saying this contract is at risk?" I nodded once. "Effective immediately." The words landed like a dropped glass. My uncle shook his head. "You can't just. This would destroy us." I tilted my head slightly. "You're not qualified to make that judgment." His face went pale. "This isn't personal," I added. "This is business." The same phrase he'd used on me. I watched him realize that everything he'd prided himself on, his rules, his detachment, his belief that he held all the cards, had been turned back on him. And there was nothing he could do. I ended the call politely. No raised voices, no threats, just a clean cut. As the screen went dark, my phone immediately began vibrating. Missed calls, messages, voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I sat back and exhaled. For years, I'd carried the weight of being underestimated. I'd let it shape me quietly, carefully. And now, for the first time, the weight had shifted. But the day wasn't over yet. Because family fallout doesn't stop at the office door. It follows you home. I didn't go home right away. After the call, I stayed in my office longer than usual, letting the adrenaline settle. Power shifts always look dramatic from the outside, but from the inside they feel strangely quiet, like the moment after a storm when you realize the damage is already done. My phone kept buzzing. I finally turned it face down. I knew who it was. And I knew what was coming next. By evening, I couldn't avoid it anymore. When I pulled into my driveway, a familiar car was already there. My uncle's. He was standing near the front door, hands shoved into his coat pockets, pacing like someone who'd lost control of the script. The moment he saw me, he straightened, forcing a calm he no longer owned. "We need to talk," he said. I unlocked the door slowly. I know. Inside, the house felt smaller with him in it. He looked around as if expecting something, evidence, maybe, that this was all a misunderstanding. "This didn't have to happen," he said. "You blindsided me. I set my keys down. You rejected me. That was different." I met his eyes. "How?" He hesitated. "That was new. You could have come to me," he said finally. "Privately." I nodded. "I did. With my application." He exhaled sharply. "Your family. So were you," I replied. The silence stretched. He rubbed his forehead, suddenly older than I'd ever seen him. "They're panicking," he admitted. "The partners. The board. That contract was everything." "I know." He looked up at me, searching my face for mercy. "Is there any way to fix this?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted him to sit with the question. Finally, I said, "There was a way." His shoulders lifted. "There was?" "Yes. Before you decided I wasn't worth a second look." Hope flickered in his eyes, then faded. "You didn't just cost me my firm," he said quietly. "You humiliated me." I kept my voice steady. "You did that yourself. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences." He stared at me, realization settling in. Not anger, not betrayal, understanding. "I taught you too well," he muttered. I gave a small, tired smile. "You taught me exactly what I needed." He left shortly after that. No shouting, no apologies, just a door closing on a version of him that no longer existed. The fallout came fast after that. Family group chats exploded. Relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had opinions. Some accused me of being ruthless. Others asked for favors they pretended weren't favors. I responded to none of it. A week later, I received a formal letter. His firm was dissolving, partners splitting, clients scattering, careers quietly ending. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to, because the real victory wasn't watching him fall. It was realizing I no longer needed his approval to stand tall. Months later, a new application landed in my inbox. Different name, different firm, same uncle. I read it carefully. Every line, every credential. Then I forwarded it to HR with a single note: proceed according to policy. No commentary, no exceptions, no family considerations. Some lessons only stick when they come full circle. And this one finally had.